Hi, I'm Michael Wise. This is Ballet Wise. I'm your host and creator. I've had the opportunity to dance all over the world. I've been in big companies, small companies, good companies, and bad companies. I've had many of an experience that hopefully I can pass on to you and help you achieve your goals. Now, today we want to talk about the fantasy of the ballet world versus the reality of the ballet world. Now, when we first start taking ballet, we have these fantasies. We see these amazing dancers that are professionals, or we see dancers in our own local studio that we look at them with such bright eyes, with so much innocence. And quite often we say, I want to do that. But the expectations that we have when we're students at our local studio are not always the hardest. You are the self-motivator. You'll have teachers that'll try to help you. But quite often, we're there because we want to get that opportunity to perform, whether it's in your local Nutcracker. Ooh, I wonder what part I'm going to get this year. Or whether it could be some other ballet that your studio does. But we have this fantasy because we're in our own little secluded world and we only see the dancers around us. And it isn't necessarily the way the professional world is. On the other hand, the professional world, it has expectations. You're now being hired to dance. They expect for you to be able to do those things. No longer is it, well, my pirouettes aren't working today. No, your pirouettes need to work because you've been hired to do that. Quite often when we're students, we have these grandeur fantasies. They're just huge. One day I'm going to be one of the best in the world. And I'm pretty sure we've all said that at some point. Or like, oh, she's so amazing. I want to be able to do that. That is the fantasy. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Those fantasies motivate us. Those fantasies push us. I know that for a fact. Those fantasies, the fantasies I had of what the ballet world would offer, in a way helped me reach those goals. But quite often, the transition into the professional world is where we see people fall apart. Sometimes we think that we're amazing dancers, and in a way you probably are, but you're not quite at the level the rest of that company necessarily needs. Remember, when you receive your first professional contract or you go off to that professional school, they will have very high expectations. And rarely will you start off meeting them. And for some people, that can be very destructive because they've always identified themselves as being these, I'm the best at my studio. Well, there's a big difference between the fantasy that we create when we're in a small studio and the reality of being in a professional school or in a company. Now, you can make that transition a lot easier if you can learn what is part of the fantasy and where are you finding your joy. As students, when we're in our first local studio, when we first start taking ballet, it's fun. We're laughing all the time. We're working. We're getting sore. We get our first pair of pointe shoes. That's like a milestone. And then you spend the rest of your life trying to get out of the pointe shoes. But the reality is, if you, when you are a student, can fall in love with the process, the work, then when you start to make that transition into the professional school or a professional company, you won't be as demoralized because the work never stops. I like to say that getting your first contract or getting into that incredible school is just the beginning of a new chapter. Doesn't mean you're done. It means you're taking it to the next level. When you go into those companies, whether it's a small company, a medium size, or a professional company, you got to keep working. You got to keep pushing the limit. You got to keep opening your eyes, because you can develop new fantasies, new ideas, new goals. Because that's what those fantasies did for you originally. It gave you that goal. It gave you inspiration to do more. Well, when you get into companies or professional schools, that fantasy can't live the same way, because now you have real expectations. Your teacher in that school, or the ballet master or artistic director of your company, is going to expect that your technique will be at a level that they can use. They also expect the fact that you can truly dance, that you have a personality, that you can be dynamic, that's already been worked on, that's already been developed. But once you're in the company, all you can do is continue to develop your technique, continue to put your personality in your movement, continue to work on your presence on stage and your acting ability, putting feelings into your dance. Now, none of these are necessarily easy, but if you've learned to fall in love with the process, the work, then that part of the joy that you found in the fantasy of what you thought the ballet world was when you were a child will be able to continue all the way through a career. I mean, I'm crazy. I've already made that very clear to so many of you over the videos. And, I started at 8 years old by choice. By 10 years of age, I wanted to be one of the best in the world. And yes, I'm insane. And yes, there were times where I didn't work at my highest level, or I goofed off a little bit too much. But that always stayed in the back of my mind. And when I was able to start my professional career, I was in a room with some of the best in the world. And you know what that meant to me? I have to get working. I have to really push. Because if I'm going to meet that fantasy, that goal that I created for myself when I was a child, I have an opportunity to reach it. So don't get discouraged when you realize that the reality of what the ballet world has to offer is a lot harder. Higher expectations, more point work, more injuries, way more expectations, because they will have expectations for you and you will have expectations for yourself. But remember, we're not done. That little child, the one that started dancing, they're still in there. You get to be the dancer that you always wanted to be. You haven't reached your goal, but in a way, you're getting to live the goal. Fantasies can be very helpful. Fantasies can also be very corruptive. So remember, you need to fall in love with the work. Love the parts you get. Enjoy the experience of being that young student. Then when you start to reach beyond that, and you start moving further forward, whether you're going into a professional school or starting your career, don't let the fact that it's a lot harder and the fact that you have expectations and they have expectations stop you from taking the best pieces of that fantasy and continuing them on. When I was able to join Moscow Classical, I wasn't the best dancer in the room, but I knew I wanted to be. Because when I was 10 years old, I made that promise to myself. And now I had an opportunity to do it. And what's interesting is, I never felt like I reached my goal because I surpassed it. I made principal dancer in 6 months. That's unheard of in a Soviet company. I was dancing roles I never ever thought I could. I was living my fantasy, but it was a different fantasy. It was my adult fantasy because I wasn't fully that child, but I got to bring that child along to see what the adult was getting to do. It's a wonderful thing. Ballet has been not only my friend, but ballet has been a purpose for me to live. I don't own ballet. I'm a steward of this art form. But I have a saying. There are those of us in this world that choose ballet. And then there are those of us that ballet chooses. If you're one of the ones that ballet chooses, and you really give into it, your fantasies may have to change, but they eventually might become a reality. And that's worth it. Because the amount of joy that we get to feel when we're dancing, the friends that we've met along the way, the experiences that we get to have. Everyone likes to say that to be a dancer, you have to sacrifice so much. I didn't sacrifice anything. I didn't want to go to the basketball game. I didn't want to go for the picnic. I wanted to go to ballet class. I wanted to do that performance. Because that fantasy in me would push me, egg me on. And when I finally did reach that level where expectations were higher, well, I held myself just as high. But I never stopped being the child. In some ways, I'm still that child. And without those fantasies, I wouldn't be able to hold on to the love that ballet offers. Now, if you feel like that's being taken from you, you may need to find a new place to study and work. And I truly do believe there's a place for everyone. And remember, you want to be a positive light in that room. The joy that you can feel, help others feel it as well. There's a lot of negativity in the ballet world, and you're going to see a lot of it in the negativity from other dancers in the professional world. You'll see negativity from the rehearsal masters and the artistic directors. It isn't always like that, but they'll have days like that, and that's just the reality. But if we can hold on to what inspired us to be dancers in the first place, it can help us get through those rough days when we are dancing professionally or we're in that really top tier school. I've heard so many times people that, started taking ballet when they were very, very young and loved it. They got into their teenage years and they just quit. And then they get into their 20s and their 30s and they're going, you know what? The biggest mistake I ever made was I quit dancing. Because they had lost a piece of themselves. We dance because it is love for us. It's a purpose. It has a meaning. It has a richness that can't even be described. You find that and spread that to others. Because we can change the ballet world for the better by bringing people along and raising those standards. Let our fantasy inspire others. Not everyone is going to make it to a professional career. And there are many of us that may want it and may have worked our lives for it, and we never truly achieve it. And there's going to be a very, very small few of us that will achieve it. But isn't it our responsibility for those of us that are able to go on and do this in our careers? It's our responsibility to let those fantasies grow, to inspire those, to bring people along. Because what are we without it? Keep that in mind. Remember why you started to do this in the first place, and let that feed you again. The fantasy of being in a small studio and being young is a wonderful experience. Being a professional or working to become a professional, it's a different reality. But that fantasy that you started off with, that love you felt the first time you did that part or that combination, the first time you did a double pirouette, remember what that felt like? It's like the air gets sucked out of the room. You can't think anymore. You're like, oh my God, that's normal. But the goal is, the next time you do that double pirouette, it should be like, all right, I got this. The third time you do that double pirouette, you're like, all right, I need to work on triples. So keep that in mind. That the fantasy that we have as a child can help inspire us as professionals. So don't lose it. Don't let anyone take it from you, because it should come from here. Dance is in us here, not just here. Dance for us is love. It's our language. It's how we express ourselves. And that starts with that fantasy as a child. So don't lose it. Capture it. Hold on to it. Realize it will change. But don't let it go. Because you have something to say with your dancing. And that confidence from feeling like you're reaching the goals that you set as a child will help you say something even more meaningful. You might be that person that inspires that next person to take a ballet class. For me, I saw a ballet class on a stage in second grade. And then they asked the guys to come up and partner the really cute girls, and I kind of chickened out. That bothered me. But then for that whole entire year, I started asking questions from people in my class that took ballet. And then I started asking my parents. And eventually I got to start taking ballet because I was inspired. But once I started, I couldn't look back. That was my fantasy. But my fantasy changed when I knew I wanted to be one of the best in the world. And then I got into North Carolina School of the Arts. And I got to train at ABT. And I got to go to San Francisco or Houston or a multitude of other places and train. The reality of those expectations made my world, my belief change. So the fantasy of what I knew I wanted to accomplish, what I could accomplish, might be slightly different, but the root is still based off that little boy, just like probably started with you. We have a responsibility to the next generation of dancers. Let them see the best of what we have to offer. Let your fantasy be also to inspire others to reach to greater heights. Because you never know how that's going to affect someone. You never know how that's going to change someone. And you never know. You may never reach a full professional career, but the child you inspired would. That in itself is a gift. So remember, the fantasy that we create as a young student in our first studios and our first performances doesn't have to die, but it does have to change a little. But our goal is not only to inspire ourselves, but to inspire others. Let us help others become better. And we can do that through our fantasies and our goals and our beliefs. So hopefully, this is a message that you've been needing to hear for a while. Or hopefully this is something that has kind of made that little dancer in you wake up and go, hey, I'm still here. Maybe it has something meaningful to you. This whole entire video series that we do here is based on trying to help everyone understand. I've had the opportunity to work with some amazing students over my career. I still produce students all the time that go off to professional careers, but I prepare them for these things. They're the ones that have been encouraging me to do this YouTube channel, to get this information out, because it's helped them so many times. You know, the running joke is I just need a pocket Michael. Because you just need somebody there just to say the encouraging word, or remind them to pull their hip under, or support their backs. You know, we all need that. And let me be that for you. You may not have that opportunity. You may not be in that world fully yet. But understand that there's a wonderful world that awaits you. But understand it's going to be different. The more advanced you become, the world changes. And so should our expectations. So hopefully this has helped you. I'm Michael Wise. This has been Ballet Wise. And all I ask you to do is raise others up and keep dancing.